Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Exploring Marketing Research, Chapter number 16, Part 1, Sampling Design and Sampling Procedure. After studying this part, you should be able to explain reasons for taking a sample rather than a complete census. Describe the process of identifying a target population and selecting a sampling frame. And lastly, you should be able to compare random sampling and systematic non-sampling errors. Sampling terminology. Let's start with sampling terminology. In sampling, you will read about sample, population or universe, population element, and census. I will explain one by one these terminologies. Sample. A sample is a subset or some part of a larger population. The purpose of sampling is to estimate an unknown characteristic of a population. Population. Sampling is defined in terms of population being studied. A population universe is any complete group, for example, of people, sales, territories, stores, or college students that share some common set of characteristics. Population element. The term population element refers to an individual member of the population. Census. Researcher could study every element of a population to draw some conclusion. A census is an investigation of all the individual elements that make up the population. A total enumeration rather than a sample. I repeat it again. A census is an investigation of all the individual elements that make up the population. A total enumeration rather than a sample. Census. Thus, if we wish to know whether more adult Texans drive pickup trucks than sedan, we could contact every adult Texan and find out whether or not they drive a pickup truck or a sedan. We would then know the answer to this question definitely. Why sample? At an orange juice tasting party, guests sample juice by having a small taste from each of a number of bottles of juice. For this, the consumer decides if he or she likes a particular juice. If an entire bottle were consumed to decide, the guest may end up too smashed to care about the next bottle. However, in a scientific study in which the objective is to determine an unknown population value, why should a sample rather than a complete census be taken? Why sample? Because of pragmatic reasons, because accurate and reliable results, because of destruction of test units. Why sample? Let's discuss first one, the pragmatic reasons. Applied marketing research projects usually have budget and time constraints. If Ford Motor Corporation wished to take a census of past purchases reactions to the company's results, to the company's recall of defective models, the researcher would have to contact millions of automobile buyers. Some of them would be inaccessible, for example, out of the country, and it would be impossible to contact all these people within a short time period. Why sample? Pragmatic reasons. A researcher who wants to investigate a population within an extremely small number of population elements may elect to conduct a census rather than a sample because the cost, labor, and time drawbacks would be relatively insignificant. Why sample? Pragmatic reasons. For a company that wants to assess salesperson satisfaction with its computer networking system, circulating a questionnaire to all 25 of its employees is practical. In most situations, however, many practical reasons favor sampling. Sampling cuts costs, reduces labor requirement, and gathers vital information quickly. These advantages may be sufficient in themselves for using a sample rather than a census, but there are other reasons. Accurate and reliable results. Another major reason for sampling is that most properly selected samples give results that are reasonably accurate. If the elements of a population are quite similar, only a small sample is necessary to accurately portray the characteristics of the interest. Voice sample accurate and reliable results. Thus, a population consisting of 10,000 11th grade students in all boys high schools will require a smaller sample than a broader population consisting of 10,000 high school students from coeducational secondary school. Voice sample distraction of test units. Many research projects, especially those in quality control testing, require the destruction of the items being tested. If a manufacturer of firecrackers wished to find out whether each unit met a specific production standard, no product would be left after the testing. Destruction of test units. This is the exact situation in many marketing strategy experiments. For example, if an experimental sales presentation were presented to every potential customer, no prospect would remain to be contacted after the experiment. Voice sample destruction of test units. In other words, if there is a finite population and everyone in the population participates in the research and cannot be replaced, no population elements remain to be selected as sampling units. The test units have been destroyed or ruined for the purpose of the research project. Stages in the selection of a sample. Before taking a sample, researcher must make several decisions. As shown in this exhibit presents these decisions as a series of sequential stages, but the order of the decision does not always follow the sequence. These decisions are highly interrelated. The issues associated with each of these stages, except for field work. So initially the researcher has to define the target population, then the researcher has to select a sample frame, determine if the probability or non-probability sampling method will be chosen, plan procedure for selecting sampling units, determine sample size, select actual sampling units, and then the researcher has to conduct the field work. Practical sampling concepts. So in practical sampling concepts, we will discuss defining the target population, the sampling frame, and the sampling units. Practical sampling concept, defining the target population. Once the decision to sample has been made, the first question concerns identifying the target population. What is the relevant population? In many cases, this question is easy to answer. Registered voters may be clearly identifiable. Likewise, if a company's 106% sales force is the population of concern, there are few definitional problems. The sampling frame. In practice, the sample will be drawn from a list of population elements that often differ somewhat from the defined target population. A list of elements from which the sample may be drawn is called a sampling frame. The sampling frame. The sampling frame is also called the working population because these units will eventually provide units involved in analysis. A simple example of a sampling frame would be a list of all members of the American Medical Association. Sampling units. During the actual sampling process, the elements of the population must be selected according to a certain procedure. The sampling unit is a single element or group of elements subject to selection in the sample. Sampling units. For example, If an airline wishes to sample passengers, it may take every 25th name on a complete list of the passengers. In this case, the sampling unit would be the same as the element. Alternatively, the airline could first select the certain flights as the sampling unit and then select certain passengers on each flight. In this case, the sampling unit would contain many elements. Random sampling error. Random sampling error is the difference between the sample results and the results of a census conducted using identical procedures. Of course, the results of a census is unknown unless one is taken, which is rarely done. Other sources of error also can be present. Random sampling error occurs because of chance variation in the scientific selection of sampling units. Random sampling errors. Random sampling error is a technical term that refers only to statistical fluctuations that occur because of chance variations in the elements selected for the sample. Systematic sampling error. Systematic or non-sampling error results from non-sampling factors, primarily the nature of a study's design and the correctness of execution. These errors are not due to chance fluctuations. Systematic sampling error. For example, highly educated respondents are more likely to cooperate with mail surveys than poorly educated ones, for whom filling out forms is more difficult and intimidating. Sample biases such as these account for a large portion of errors in marketing research. The term sample bias is somewhat unfortunate because many forms of bias are not related to the selection of the sample. Less than perfectly representative samples. Random sampling errors and systematic errors associated with the sampling process may combine to yield a sample that is less than perfectly representative of the population. Two non-sampling errors, sample frame error and non-response error, are related to sample design. Thus, the actual sample is drawn from a population different from a smaller than the ideal. Thank you. That's all for part 1.